How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Bond's Apartment. Very special video. I say that a lot, but we're gonna get a little serious-ish. But I am sitting here with a good friend, a brother, and a mentor, Mr. David Zaritsky. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for doing this. We've got multicam, multi-lights,
fancy,
I literally, this is my audition for 60 Minutes.
And we have Blackwell
We have
rum.
Blackwell. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
Needed to have a Bond libation.
Exactly.
Very
Sweet
good. Mother's milk.
So
serious, sorry.
Here's the deal. I know a lot about David. Thankfully. I'm very fortunate to know a lot about you. Spend a lot of time with you. Intimate time.
Thank you.
Never in the same bed like Kyle, but...
Big spoon, little spoon, yes.
Yeah. What I'd like to do for the audience is get to know David better. And I will be asking questions to David that even I don't know the answer to. We're sitting here in your basement.
Technically, yes.
Which is essentially like a Bond museum.
Technically, yes.
I've been here several times. It always continues to impress.
Thank you.
I want to start from the beginning.
Sure.
As a kid, what was it about Bond that you think ignited what eventually turned into all of this?
I used to have a stock answer to this that I think was a sexy and cool answer. And it was that Bond, at a very young age, provided escapism. It was introduced to me at a young age, and it was just thrilling in the fantasy of it, and I loved the whole fantasy aspect. Right. As I become a little bit older and a little bit more introspective with things, I think, if I'm being honest, it was to close the connection and the relationship with my father, because Bond was so important to my father. I could see it.
Yeah.
You know, the way he would invite me to see a movie, the connection of introducing the actors and the types of movies, how excited he would get. And it's just like watching a father watch a baseball game or get into a sport that I didn't have. My father would watch his sports solo, very siloed, and he wouldn't invite me into that. But Bond, the door was wide open. The vampire was invited into the house. And so a part of me does think it's a bit of a nostalgic recapture of youth and connection with my father, who passed away very early, 62 years of age. 62.
Yeah.
That's 6 years away from where I am right now.
Right, right. So you basically kind of, even at a young age, recognized that this was something that he consciously chose to let you into.
I can't imagine that he said to himself, that's it. It's time for my son to be introduced. There's no world that I could see that happening. But I do think he knew that I was into fantasy and imagination. And it was something that, instead of saying, sports, I don't know, David, it might be a bridge too far, that is something that he could embrace. So I think from that standpoint, it was the path of least resistance for, I'm going to say it, for creating a bond between him and I.
Right, right. So what, you mentioned sports with your dad. Was there ever any interest in sports for you?
Literally zero. Sometimes he'd be watching like race cars and things like that, and I would sit down and try to watch it, and I would become incredibly bored. Baseball, because mostly all this stuff, I didn't know what was going on. And when you don't know what's going on and no one teaches you how to do it, I did not have a family where none of the 3 kids that I'm a part of were taken to after-school sports, for example. We did other things after school. So, yeah, it never entered. And even today, very light.
Yeah. What type of things were you guys doing after school?
I was doing karate.
Okay.
Yeah. I was doing religious study and things like that. Okay. Believe it or not, learning, Aramaic and Hebrew and crazy things like that, which are a little useless now, but
which I heard you whip out earlier today, which is pretty impressive.
I did. So I can overhear a lot of interesting, which I guess is kind of spy-like.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Dropped in the right environment, I could absolutely understand and even speak certain things. So, some value to it, I guess.
So, as far as the fantasy aspect, what age did you notice that was what really captured you?
Oh, well, I mean, the one I can remember, just because I keep bringing it back in my adult life, is the Star Wars. Star Wars really catapulted the whole idea of the hero journey and the capture of fantasy, and the fact that I lived in a neighborhood that had 2 houses in it. It had our house and my grandmother's house, and that was it.
See, these are things I didn't know.
Yeah, so I mean, we were not in a neighborhood, in other words. We were up on this hill. My parents had a very nice house, and right across, literally across the driveway, was my grandmother's house, and there wasn't a kid within miles. So guess who had to play by themselves? Don't read into that. I had to take styrofoam from refrigerator packings and things like
Right.
this and make my own environments. My brother is 5.5 years differential. My sister's a sister. So I didn't really have playmates.
Yeah.
My playmate was my imagination.
Yeah.
So anything that really drove the creative spark of fantasy was up my alley.
That's such. I literally feel like Barbara Walters. Such
Yeah,
a good
there you
answer.
go.
Okay, so when doing, see, I mean, I truly, these are things I did not know, which is awesome. So, obviously, this is a Bond channel. We're
Yeah.
very Bond centric. You and I do share the Star Wars in common.
Yes.
Was there ever a point in time where you kind of felt like that would be the direction? I mean, not so much as a kid, obviously, but you did collect Star Wars pretty heavily at one point too, correct?
Like well into my 30s.
Yeah. Okay.
So I loved Star Wars, got out of Star Wars, got into other things, and then revisited Star Wars when I was married to Danielle and had little children.
Yeah.
And I started collecting the Don Post masks. It started out very innocently, where I wanted a couple of masks that were important to me as a child, and Don Post was this old company that made them. I found them very inexpensively at a vintage place. And I just loved having a one-to-one representation. Again, this is a part of what I do now with Bond. It brought the fantasy from the screen into my real life.
Right.
Because I had these masks. And it wasn't like I would run around pretending to be Chewbacca as a 24-year-old. But I'm not saying I didn't do that.
Right.
But what I started to do was make my own movies and
Okay.
take it into my own hands. And I made a couple of like very amateur, very stupid, short, funny Star Wars movies with my cousins and Danielle and poor Danielle. And then I wanted to do my own full-length Star Wars feature.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I started to really collect tons of props and armors and, again, full outfits, full size R2-D2s and Darth Vaders and more models. And then the nostalgia came back and I'm like, gosh, I used to own those figures. So around the time I did this movie, I started to push myself, and this is like the early and mid 90s. I pushed myself to turn myself into a Star Wars fiend.
Okay.
And just collected mostly Star Wars.
So, to kind of stay on the Star Wars topic,
Yeah.
I obviously know that you have kind of restarted that. I've helped you with that. We won't dive into it too deeply
Yeah.
now. But what made you kind of, from what I understand, you sold a lot of those things you had
I did.
previously.
I did the bulk of it, if not all of it.
Was it like, I mean, was it just kind of like, hey, I'm ready to try something different? Or was it a
Yeah.
space thing in the home? Or?
No, it was never. Even though we didn't have the space back then.
Right.
It was never a space thing. Because somehow we found space. God love Danielle again.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is, I'll call it an evolution. Other people would call it a de-evolution, but it was an evolution of what I was interested in. So when I collected all the Star Wars replicas and props and toys and things like that, it was fine until I had my first screen-used prop.
Okay.
And then I was like, hold on a second. I've just captured... I went from making my own movies and capturing a representation of the film to I can actually own a piece of the film, like something I see up on celluloid and millions of people see. And it was a kind of addiction. And collection is a sort of addiction.
Oh, yeah.
It hits your dopamine.
Yeah.
You get a rush. It's the journey and the trophy. So I got my first couple of screen-used pieces, and then I'm like, I like Indiana Jones, I like Blade, I like this. And suddenly my collection went from replicas and Star Wars to multiple different genres, from
Right.
Superman to like TV shows. But these were all things that you could actually find on the screen. They were used by the prop people.
You know what the first screen used was?
Absolutely. It was the Tomorrow Never Dies Ericsson phone.
Oh, okay. So the first thing was
1997.
was a Bond thing.
It was a Bond thing.
Do you think that kind of kick-started it?
Sure.
Yeah.
And if it didn't kickstart it fully, it at least anchored it into a series of different films that I liked. And by the way, I was the multi-genre guy. Like amongst my friends back then, I was the guy that didn't collect just one thing. Like now, if you ask anybody, what does David collect? They're like, James Bond. But back then, it was tons of different things. So it was multi-genre. Like I had Starship Trooper outfits.
Okay.
I was even doing cosplay. So that's costume play for
Yeah,
those
yeah.
newbies, where I would go to conventions with friends and wear screen-used outfits from Starship Trooper. I wore a Judge Dredd, Danny Cannon, full head-to-toe Judge Dredd outfit.
Yeah.
I was not in Judge Dredd shape back then, but I still
Right,
wore it, damn
right,
it.
right.
And it was spandex. So these were the things I was happening of trying to recapture fantasy, nostalgia, but bring it as a moment of walking off the celluloid.
Right. Okay. So you kind of mentioned it might be a little bit of a kickstarting point for the Bond stuff. I had that similar thing. You and I kind of went through a little Star Wars kick
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah.
And for me, it was kind of like, okay, I can see where I can store these pieces. And then it kind of got to the point where I was like, I don't really have the space.
Right.
There's something about Star Wars movies will always have such a special meaning to me. But there is a difference in collecting the Star Wars stuff and the Bond stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of seem to be always intrigued with the Bond stuff. And I feel like probably because it's a little more on the mature side. Do you ever feel that way as well? Not the collecting itself, but it's like I can buy a piece of Bond clothing that I can wear to work. For Star Wars, it's like I would buy an action figure that
Yeah.
would most likely just sit on display somewhere.
So it's almost the next rung in, I'm going to pleasantly call it my evolution,
Yeah.
where the reason I went from multi-genre movies of collecting screen use to like a focus on Bond is that very reason you just outlined. I started to get pieces that weren't screen used of Bond that I could actually wear. Now, you can't wear Stormtrooper outfits and Indiana Jones. You
Right.
could possibly wear, but not all the time. And I got a pair of shoes. So the first thing I got, I remember, was The World Is Not Enough, the monk strap shoes
Yeah.
that he wears. I was
Yep.
like, oh my God, this is gorgeous, but so expensive. You know, hair blown back, expensive back then to me. But I could wear it every day. And then the watch from Tomorrow Never Dies, I could wear it every day. And that whole idea of the Bond lifestyle became such a focus of mine,
Yeah.
of living and breathing those moments and collecting those pieces, that the things around me that at some time meant so much to me, looking at like a beetle from Indiana Jones or a screen-used, piece of something from Indiana Jones, was just set dressing. But literally set
Right.
dressing was just background. I would walk into the room and not even see it anymore. And I looked around and it said, these things are worth a Turnbull and Asser shirt. These things are worth. So I
Okay.
sold
Okay.
off the bulk of my screen-used items that weren't James Bond.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, back then, it nets a lot of money. Some pieces went to investing in the family, investing in a house, and some pieces, most of the pieces, went to buying more Bond stuff
Right.
and really kickstarting my collection because of the Bond lifestyle aspect.
That's interesting. So you actually made kind of a conscious decision to get rid of other collectors' items to continue to dive into Bond collecting.
I did, and I've tried. It doesn't look like it if you look at my collection, but I've tried to be responsible. And the one thing I have been very good about is never spending what I don't have. I've never, and we've never, like Danielle and I, even when we were young kids, never had a credit card bill carry from month to month. We pay 100% of our credit card bills every month. If I was to buy something and I had to carry that over, it was a no-go.
Okay.
So I had to subsidize my new forward motion, my new inertia somehow. The sale of those screen use pieces to people that desperately wanted them gave them to a good collection, and second of all, funded that.
Okay. So at this point, we're now kind of turning that stone and we're starting to collect Bond stuff. There was obviously a point in time where you had a TV show down here
Yes,
giving you like a quote on your collection.
years later, yeah.
When did the point kind of hit you? Obviously that being one of them.
Right.
But when did it hit you at first when you kind of were like, I've kind of got something pretty special here?
From a size standpoint, do you mean? Or
Anything.
just-
Even if you're like, you know what, I've got 4 or 5 screen use pieces.
Yeah.
I've got, 20 posters, this, that. Like, when did you realize, like, this is
From a
kind of
collection
turning
standpoint,
into
yeah.
a thing?
So it was probably earlier than that TV show. The
Mm-hmm.
TV shows and things like that where they go, oh, your thing is worth, they're fun, they're entertaining. There may be affirmation of the value or the worth, but I've never looked at my collection or even the individual pieces as I've hit a level, I've hit an echelon because of what it's worth. It was always about how I'm curating pieces.
Right.
And I'll tell you where it first happened. I think you'll get a kick out of this. I used to have these IKEA shelves, so like the see-through ones. I forget
Yeah.
what they're called,
Yeah,
but they're
yeah.
called something, and everybody collects them, and you can put the light at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I had 2 of those filled with Bond stuff. When I had to get rid of those because the Bond collection had gotten so big, it was a turning point. And I said, you know something? I'm going to create an environment where people can walk around and not have a glass case in between them, or I
Yeah.
open something out or turn on a light, but they could touch it. They
Yeah.
could pick it up. I want to put the environments. I'll put the poster with it because the posters mean so much to so many people and the artwork. And I want to have a curated area that you can walk through. And just like James Bond immerses me in the fantasy of it, I want to immerse the visitors. And so I started to build a collection. If you look way back then, it's actually, Danielle would love it today. It's adorable because it's like a few little scattered pieces and a
Right.
giant Bond poster. Over time, you start to fill those shelves, you update the shelves, you accumulate more.
Right.
And then it was about halfway through that point, before that TV show, where I said, you know something, I have enough in my collection. Here's the turning point. I could do this chronologically. I could literally have somebody come into my collection area and visit Bond from 1962 until present day and
Yeah.
keep updating it like a real museum. And that's when I said, this is not a basement and it's not a collection, it's an archive. And people thought I was sort of being marketing and cute and pithy and, self-congratulatory by calling it an archive. Is it really an archive? Yeah, because it's a collection of archival pieces, whether they be replica or screen used, that tell a story over time. That's exactly what an archive is.
Yeah. And it's a play on words too from Goldeneye.
Very good.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being able to touch the pieces, which of course I've been down here several times. I've touched things. I've broken things.
Oh,
Nothing. Aston Martin button. It's besides the
Oh, well,
point.
that's-
Kyle has broken things.
Yeah.
Hey, Kyle.
yeah. All my
What-
best friends have broken things.
That's, I
Yeah.
think, a rite of passage.
But I never
in here.
get crazy
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
No. Just that one time you hit. No, I'm just kidding. So, out of curiosity, why was that important to you? That it's something you can touch? Was it kind of sharing that nostalgia with everybody else who probably had that in common? Like what? I mean, a lot of these pieces are expensive, and they,
Yeah.
jokes aside, are breakable, and very, very precious. Very
Yeah.
few and far between. Why allow that?
I think a lot of it comes from the specialness of people's reactions.
Yeah.
So when people come down here and they see a piece, I literally can tell the importance of the item to them in their history of Bond by their reaction. And it's usually like it's almost like a recognition first and a point, and then I notice that they consciously step back. And I realized the reason they were stepping back away from the piece is it's so high and mighty in their
Like a
eyes.
disbelief.
It's so disbelief,
Yeah.
but it's also almost like it's almost spiritual in nature. Like it's so big, it's like hollowed ground. It's like I don't even think I should be by this piece. And so I'll literally say to them when I see that look, you could touch it. You could touch it if you
Yeah,
want.
yeah.
I say, look, pick it up. Let's get a picture with you. And they look at me like I'm crazy. I've had people try on my screen-used Daniel Craig Armani jacket from 2006 Casino Royale. That is, I can almost pinpoint exactly where it was in the airport scene in The Chase.
Yeah.
When people try that on and they get that picture, I see something take over them. Like
Yeah.
everything's different. It motivates them. It lifts them. And I always thought my favorite part of a Bond film was that it lifts you up in the most positive way. It makes you feel triumphant for even the time that you're watching it.
Right.
Maybe you get out of a Bond movie and you check your phone and your boss is pissed at you. Or your wife is like, I thought you were going to be home at this point, and whatever stress and pressure. But while you're watching a Bond film, that's gone. I want that to be in my museum. So when people come down here, I don't want it to be like hands off, don't touch, stress and pressure. It's like, these are your toys too. You're playing in my play box when we were kids, and I would bring my case of Star Wars figures and I'd play with you and your Star Wars figures.
Yeah.
And they were your toys and they were my toys. They were our toys.
Yeah.
And so I want them to feel like these are their toys.
You do a good job of that.
Thank you.
I remember my first time down here, you actually took that Armani jacket off the mannequin and
got
crumbled
pictures.
it.
Oh yeah. I
Remember?
know. Oh yes.
To just demonstrate how lightweight it was.
And then I think I threw it at you. Like I was
I think
like,
you
here.
did. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
to say this is not going to break.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that to me is pretty crazy. I mean, coming down here, even like this is probably at this point, not necessarily trip here, but times down here, 20 or 30 or
Yeah,
something.
it's 15, 20. I was going
Yeah,
to say.
yeah.
at
I
least.
mean, and it's like, I think it'll never fully hit me how insane it is. And you mentioned obviously the reactions people get.
Yeah.
What is that probably one of the most special parts to you? Like literally coming down here and you go, okay, all right, I'll start at Dr. No, say somebody my age, 32.
Yeah.
Dr. No, and it's like, yeah, okay, From Russia with Love. But then you see me hit Casino Royale, and then you just see a different
That's
spark.
true.
Is that something that you
It's a
really
major
enjoy?
part of it.
Yeah.
It's a major part of it. I'll say the other part that I really get a kick out of is, and I don't know what this is, and it's not, nobody will ever dub a Bond fan like, you are a Bond fan, and
Right.
you know, but I feel a little protective and passionate about the franchise, but also people's joy for the franchise or frustration. And there's so much frustration, especially nowadays, that if I can create a little bit of joy, it's why I do these Gatheralls, for example. If I can create a little bit of joy around James Bond, I think it's so important for me to do that, to share in that. Coming down here and having those moments like you do, like I realize, because I see it on you, every time you come down here, it doesn't matter how many times.
Yeah.
We could have had a whole weekend here, and you come down here on a Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, and you'll still walk around like, oh cool.
Oh, yeah.
It's that type of joy that can send you into the world that can sometimes be a little harsh.
Yeah, it is still surreal. Personally, you know, I kind of like to go around and see, because I'm here 2-3 times a year, maybe.
Yeah.
If I'm lucky. And I'm usually trying to spot what's new.
And you're good at that, too.
I'm not bad at it.
Scary.
I'm not bad at it.
It's just
yeah.
new. It's this tiny little thing.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
how did
I love
you
doing
know
it.
that? Yeah.
So, obviously, the collection continued to grow and grow. When that TV show, because I actually only saw that recently. I
Oh,
think
wow.
You kind of
Are
told
you
me
serious?
About it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was similar to this. Obviously, more movies have come and whatever the case may be. But when was it when you decided, let's start doing something like a podcast or a YouTube or a blog? When did you get to the point where you're like, I need to share this with people? Or not even just that, your passion for the character?
Some of this came out of sheer laziness. I was writing articles, and I was writing mostly articles at some point for Remmer, my friend Remmer, James Bond Lifestyle. Yeah. And I can't. I think I'm okay at writing, but it takes a long time. And I just was like, you know what? Why don't I do this thing, YouTube, and I could just do the videos, and Remmer could put them up on his piece, and we started doing that, and they were incredibly popular. They would bring a lot of people to his website, and I remember one day he came to me and said, these things are becoming its own entity.
Yeah.
You're becoming your own entity. Like, why don't you do your thing? Like, he was my encouragement. And then one of the first videos I had done, again, sticking with Bond sartorial and lifestyle like I had loved, that really catapulted it and said, this is something I'm really going to invest my time in, was, of course, 2012 Skyfall Peacoat, where I put this up, I wore it around London, I did a YouTube video, and they wound up selling 800 coats in a very short amount of time off of the video.
Yeah.
These coats are $800, $900, so you do the math. And other brands noticed, I noticed, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can review it, I can wear it out in the wild, and somehow, crazily, other people are interested. And it was that video, by the way, more than any other video, that I trace back my catapulting into what's become the Bond experience.
I think I've looked recently. I'm pretty sure that is still your most viewed.
I don't think it is.
Is it close? It's close.
It's up there.
Yeah.
It's up there. But, things like the... believe it or not, the 4 Fs of polo wearing, the 4 fits of fashion,
I remember
and things
that.
like that
I remember
is
that.
insane. The Aston Martin ones are insane.
Yeah.
There's some really wild ones that have
Watch
really
ones
exploded.
do well.
The watch ones do well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how did you get in touch with Remmert at first? Did you just become a fan of the website and reach out? Or?
Yeah. Well, Remmert and I had met at a couple of functions and things like that, and we just got talking. And back then, you didn't have all this communications and threads, but I loved what he was doing. He always had an artistic eye, and he's like the nicest guy in the world.
Yes,
so
he
he had all those criteria I was looking for in a friend.
Yeah. It's what's crazy to me, and I finally got to meet Remmert recently.
I know.
And I told him it's crazy to think that that is how I discovered you. Was from his page.
A lot of people say that.
I was, and not to date anybody here, because at this point, 32, Die Another Day was my first movie in the theater. That was 22 years ago.
That's
I can
amazing.
say it, even I'm getting old.
32? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting older
To
because
think that I
a
saw
baby
a movie
that's born
22
is getting
years.
older.
Yeah, but you know what? It's still tough.
All right.
It's still tough.
That's sad.
But I told Remmert when I met him that I think it was probably around 2010
Right.
when I first discovered his website and
Oh,
your
wow.
stuff.
Okay.
And I used to sit at work anxiously waiting for the next video.
Oh, wow.
It brought me so much comfort knowing that somebody else was this involved in Bond.
Yeah.
Because I got started at a young age because of GoldenEye. But I think unlike most people my age, because of probably, I mean, my parents are not so, I mean, my dad's 72 right now, so
Yeah.
I have a brother and sister in their late 40s, so I'm a little younger than probably most people would have a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would spend a lot of time with my grandparents. I was going back, I'd see GoldenEye, and then I was like, well, there's, X amount before that. Like,
Right.
why am I not watching these?
Yeah.
So I had that interest, and I had an obsession unlike anybody I knew until
Right.
I saw your videos.
Yeah, I mean, the motivation you're talking about is a big part of the reason of why I do what I do today on such a consistent basis. So yes, I do it for myself. Sorry, first and foremost, to get on my creativity. It's my passion, my hobby. I have to love it first. But the second thing is people's reactions and what it does and the impact that it has on other people. I know that if a video comes out twice a week, that's twice a week people have come to me and said, your video took me out of the trial and tribulations of COVID,
right.
or they got me through this or got me through that, and I can't wait. And even if it's a subject I don't know or even like or appreciate, I'll still watch it because it relaxes me.
Right.
So it's that whole, again, escapism that it creates in the community.
Yeah, you have an ability to draw people in to your videos. I mean,
It's
it's
great.
People see it, and I think people think rather than this isn't something I'm interested in, they think this is an opportunity to learn something about my favorite
Oh,
character.
that's great
about
to
a
hear.
brand. Yeah. So after the Billy Reed Peacoat video came out,
Yeah.
did you kind of have a moment where you said, I got to keep doing this? Or was that kind of a one-off thing?
I want to do it.
Yeah.
Not
yeah.
have to, but more of I want to do it, and I want to do more of the style stuff.
Yeah.
Like this was like, okay, I feel a connection to this. Probably like I've never felt before. I never felt it with the screen used items. I never felt it with Star Wars as much as this. Any of the genres or hobbies I've ever been in, this felt at home, mostly because of what we talked about earlier. My passion and hobby could be born out into the world.
Right.
It wasn't something I just enjoy on a Sunday morning in a little cave in my basement. But the other thing too is like it just felt very natural for me to talk about it. Like, what do I really appreciate it? Well, I appreciate the way I can move,
Yeah.
the way it feels, the cost, the customer experience I had in buying it. And I'm like, those topics which seem honestly de rigueur, like everybody talks about those.
Yeah.
The way they came to me originally is because it just felt very natural to talk about the chronological journey
Yeah.
of acquiring these things and living with them.
So the Skyfall Peacoat video, most likely 2012-ish?
Yeah.
So now here we are, 2024, 12 years later, also
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
You have made a very conscious effort to improve physical fitness.
Yes.
Was that out of feeling better? Was that out of seeing somebody like Daniel Craig and how he portrayed the character versus Roger or Sean or whoever? Was it because you wanted to look good in the clothing? What drove you to focus on that? Because 12 years later, you look fantastic.
Thank you.
You look fantastic.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. And
Yeah.
I will say this. It's mostly the second one. If I'm going to be a blunt instrument.
Yep.
I wish it was that, I just want to feel better. That didn't come until much later. And of course, it is the main reason why I do it now. Back then, it was Daniel Craig. I collect the clothes, the items, the props, the toys. What I'm not collecting is what he looks like. And I remember, like everybody else, men and women, doesn't matter your proclivity, walks out of that water and it's like, what the hell is going on here?
Right.
And I said, he's the same age as me. I have no excuse. And it started out slowly, changing diet, looking at that. But it really transformed very quickly to, I want to look like Bond. This is my goal. I need to look like Bond, as close to Daniel Craig as possible, to, all right, I'm not going to look like that because I don't have the money or the time to spend 6 hours in a gym every day and I'm not being paid to do a movie.
Right.
But what if it's a game? What if this is a competition with myself that I can constantly get and be a better version of myself, the way I feel, the way my health, even work. By the way, when I started doing the Bond workouts, my work discipline and focus improved.
Yeah.
I was just my competitive nature in general improved because of my workouts and my physical and my health, because I started to do this and transform it into how I deliver things to clients and the promises and the follow-up and how I present to people, like everything. I wanted to be more like Bond, and I use Bond as a pattern
Yeah.
in physical, mental, and action.
Yeah.
And it seems to have been okay for me.
Yeah. And we did touch on, obviously, the Bond experience itself.
Yeah.
You don't feel as a necessity. But doing it and eventually growing this audience and this following and interacting with brands, did you ever feel any sort of obligation to kind of, because you obviously try to live the Bond lifestyle, did you ever feel an obligation at all to also look the part?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, still do.
Yeah.
Even as recent as this last Gatherall. So, you know, I push a lot of food pictures. Like I'm trying not to be like just style. So the hashtag Bond Fitness Challenge, which I started years ago,
Yeah.
and it became incredibly popular during COVID. And we've had even Daniel Craig's trainer and tons of trainers and doctors and yada yada. What's wonderful about that yada yada part is that we have the information. Now, if I don't take that information and turn it into action, it's not very Bond-like, is it?
Right.
So showing up to a Gatherall and I look like a little bit unhealthy. By the way, I'm not saying fat. I'm saying unhealthy, whether it's my
Tired.
parlor, tired,
yeah.
run down, hunching. I just did a podcast on hunching, like literally like, eating your food like this. If you could see people eating their food like this as opposed to sticking your back shoulders against you. And I am not a tall drink of water, so I need all the height I can get, but standing up straight like Bond would, and it fixes everything. It fixes your age of your neck and all
There's
that
health
stuff.
benefits to
There's
it,
health
yeah,
benefits to
yeah.
it. There's circulation benefits. So if I'm not doing that and somebody looks at me and they've watched a video, they're like, this guy's a bunch of bullshit.
Right.
Like he's telling me to do this, but he's eating chicken and waffles, which I did. Only a little bit. Not so good. Not so good if I'm being honest. Sorry, Clubhouse. Then they cry bullshit. And they
Yeah.
should. Because when people see me review a product or an item, and they see me get excited and very kid-like, and they're like, David, you're just, you're happy because you got a freebie. Honestly, I don't need the freebie. I'm excited. I'm genuinely excited, and you're seeing that in real time.
Right.
It's the same thing with health and wellness. If I'm not showing that excitement, I don't like, there's a lot of Instagrammers that will put droplets of water on them, take a selfie working out in a hotel gym, and then go back to sleep.
Right.
I don't do that.
Right.
And there is an obligation to do it, to pay for it with what I've talked about. But honestly, 90%, I'm doing it for me.
Yeah.
If I don't work out and do something for myself, or if I don't choose like a salmon salad, for example, it wears on me.
We talking about a Wawa salmon salad or like a
No, I'm
good
talking
salmon
like a
salad?
Harvest salmon salad,
yeah,
like this
yeah.
afternoon where
Yeah.
we ate.
Right.
Like I went for that because it's tasty to me, but the main reason I went for that is I knew it'd be good for me.
Yeah. So another kind of follow-up to that, friends of yours and family know that you've got, here's a little tidbit for the folks at home,
Oh.
an insane sleep schedule.
Yeah.
You sleep early and you get up even earlier.
Yeah. Yes.
Was that always a thing, or did that kind of follow with the Bond Fitness stuff?
So that started 15 years ago, by accident.
So we're talking right around Skyfall.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit before that, actually.
yeah.
So it really started to happen around the Daniel Craig movie beginnings.
yeah.
What happened was I realized that it was more important for me to have that extra time of the day than sleep that somehow I wasn't missing.
Yeah.
In fact, the times in the beginning when I started the sleep pattern of trying to force myself to sleep later, every time I slept later, I felt worse.
Yeah.
I felt drained and
Yeah,
run
oh
down.
yeah.
So when I get up and I get 4 hours of sleep, 5 hours sometimes at best, I have all those hours before the world wakes up to do the things I want to do. It's my world.
Quietly and
Quietly.
productively.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I want to touch on, which that of course is very interesting, and I've tried adopting and it's very difficult. But obviously you said hashtag Bond Fitness Challenge. Yeah. Another big thing with your channel is Frugal Bond.
Oh, yeah.
Why was that so important to you? And for obvious reasons, it's a huge success. Why was that so important to do?
I think that there might be I don't know, an assumption out there that I started Frugal Bond because I wanted to show people how to get the look for less. That happened eventually. But I started the Frugal Bond because I couldn't find or didn't know what the actual pieces were from the film. We didn't have the detectives and the
Right.
online onslaught of ways to find out, or the relationships that we have now with the people that worked in the movie to find out what those items were. So if I saw a blue polo, I couldn't have known that it was Sunspell, you know, and the brands weren't savvy enough back then to say, you know something, we're going to market the hell out of this.
Right.
So I had to go, well, he's wearing a blue polo and it looks like it's a piqué, you know, pattern. I'm going to go out and get a blue polo. Well, guess where? I went to Target or Kohl's or Walmart and things like that. I bought tons of blue polos and I'm like, you know, these are dirt cheap. These are like $9.99 or $14. Like, I think this is like Frugal Bond.
Yeah.
So not only am I finding something that looks the part, because I never dreamed in a million years that I would start to get all the actual pieces.
Yeah.
That was way back with Casino Royale. By the time we had Skyfall, we were able to identify things. But I'm like, there are still people, now that we're finding these things, that look at a $800 Billy Reed coat and they're like, I'll never be able to do it because I have other priorities and responsibilities. And I respect the hell out of that. So what's a person to do? Never? Just don't get the look? No. What about a Frugal Bond version? And so I started to do research on the different looks. And now you've got all these people out there that are doing it, which I'm so happy about because I don't do it as much as I did before. I do it sometimes, but it's just a pleasure that everybody can afford the Bond look. It doesn't matter your socioeconomical background.
Yeah. Well, that was a big change too, like you said, with Casino Royale. Even from Casino Royale to Skyfall.
Yeah.
You know, obviously Quantum in between. Quantum, we knew the Tom Ford things and things like that, and the
Sure.
Omega. But once Skyfall came, there was a huge, you know, with the N. Peel and Barber and Billy Reed.
Yeah.
That obviously probably wasn't the best thing in the world for the collection.
Right.
Good for the collection, but not best for the wallet, obviously. I mean, I got a Billy Reed peacoat, had to have it, but went with the gray, as you know, which you always are so kind to compliment me on.
That looks great.
Appreciate that.
By the way, just so you're saying, I mean, it's interesting how you're talking about like snowball and accumulation, because that's exactly what the community around the Bond lifestyle, it really started, I believe, in Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah.
And it was small, really small group of people. And then it hit a jump, a major jump in The World Is Not Enough. And then Die Another Day, there was an explosion of a Bond lifestyle and style sartorial community. And then by the time we hit Casino Royale, and especially Quantum of Solace, it was monstrous.
Yeah.
And now you've got huge factions of individuals that are collecting these pieces.
I mean, there's pretty much nothing from No Time to Die that's not a very well-marketed, well-known piece that you can probably still find.
All of it.
Yeah.
Everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So with all that said, obviously, so we've touched on Frugal Bond, we've touched on Bond Fitness Challenge. You've collected many pieces from a lot of different brands. A time started to come where you were working with these brands or in touch with these brands.
Yeah.
What was that moment like when these things kind of started to happen? Was that like a I made it moment, or was that more of like a wow, this is really, really cool and I kind of can't believe this has turned into that? Obviously something you probably never set out to do.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, you're right. I would say that it's a great feeling, you know, that the brands respected what I was doing as my own brand to integrate together. That being said, if I'm being realistic, and I would say it if the brands were in the room, is they understood that this was almost like transactional nature.
Yeah.
That there was an audience that I had that seemed to be captivated, and I know people hate this word, but they use it in marketing terms, influenced by some of the reviews and the discussions, good or bad.
Right.
And so they thought to themselves, what if we could put these items in front of David, let him test them out, and he will do his reviews. There's more authenticity to that rather than an ad campaign. There's pricing efficiencies. Somebody sends me a polo versus putting up a Madison Avenue agency to create a video.
Right.
But the biggest thing is the spread of word. And they realized very early on, a lot of brands, especially ones like you mentioned, and Peel and Oliver Brown, that this model of using people as sort of an emulation target for other people that are looking for style hints and which brands to go to is here to stay.
Yeah.
And it's not only here to stay, it never left back when people were looking at, Cool Hand Luke and Steve McQueen and things like that.
Right.
We've always had our style icons. Now they're just your neighbors,
Yeah.
or they're your friends, or people in the Bond community, and that's okay.
Do you feel that's actually like, it kind of makes it more relatable? It's easier to purchase something because it's just like, your everyday guy wearing it?
It's an important distinction because a lot of people will say, well, he thinks, or they're more relevant to the brands. Relevant. I don't use the word relevancy. I use relatable. If you have somebody that can talk about the brands and talk about the style and the clothing, and they have an audience, possibly they have more relatability to that individual, as opposed to a corporate spokesperson who is, of course, going to say that's amazing. Or if you have a brand of clothing that's going to show a very young model who's got a very angry face. I love those like angry, pissed off model looks of the, very tall, thin models. Nothing wrong with this. I get it. It's very traditional, but it's not relatable.
Right.
For those buying these brands that cost so much money, usually they're of an older nature, age-wise. They're well established. They understand what they can afford.
Yeah.
But that model doesn't look like me, so there's no relatability.
Right.
This is relatable. I
Yeah.
got crow's feet. I got, hair akimbo. There's a lot of things wrong. I'm a goof. I take the mickey out of myself. Oh my gosh, this guy's kind of like me.
Yeah.
Those models, not so much.
Yeah. So as far as, obviously, you've worked with a lot of brands, you've been in touch with a lot of CEOs and marketing specialists and representatives and ambassadors and things like that. But then there came a time where you were actually walking red carpets, interviewing Daniel Craig.
Yeah.
What was that like when you kind of first got asked to do any of those things?
That was a huge craziness. And again, it happened around the time of Skyfall.
Yeah.
That's, again, this game-changing year was 2012 for me, where I started to be able to do that more, or, they'd give you sort of access. No one was buying me tickets or sending me on planes back then or anything like that. None of that happened back then. But they would give me access. They would say, hey, the tickets are going to be announced in 24 hours. We're going to give you a heads up, so you're assured, 2 to 4 tickets, however many you want. Moments like that, which was great. And it's funny, Danielle and I talk about this. Well, you and I have never talked about this, but back then, especially in 2012, if I was invited to a Bond official thing, in 24 hours, I would get on a plane with Danielle and go, no matter what it is.
Right.
It could be the opening of an envelope. We're making James Bond envelopes, and there's an opening of an envelope. Here you go. I would go to everything. Now I don't.
Right.
But back then, we would go to everything. We look back on that and laugh and say, you were really grasping at everything, to be a part of everything. As time goes on and went on, and you get interviews with like Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson and Daniel Craig, and I'm not name dropping for name dropping's sake, but when that happens, there's another turning point in your head, and it says, you know something, I have a finite amount of time. I have family first. I have my job. I have friends. I have things like that. I have my life. Bond, I really need to pick and choose my moments of time.
Yeah.
Tempus fugit. So I've got to choose, now that I have those big, bombastic, impactful moments, are they the moments I'm really getting high on? Is it because it's Daniel Craig? No, it's the way it makes me feel. Like, honestly, interviewing Daniel Craig, I could get the same feeling out of hanging out with you and Joe Darlington. So in many cases, instead of flying to London and having all this glitz, there are many times where I get more excited about having you come and stay with your wife here for a weekend. I do. I get the same level, if not more, of excitement, because for me, it's about the way it makes me feel, as opposed to telling people on an Instagram, look what I got.
Yeah.
I got an interview with Daniel Craig. Aren't I relevant and special and important? Honestly, I don't care about that anymore.
Yeah.
I love when people say, hey, I followed you. I'm like, oh, that's great. I think you'll love the content. But I don't care that they're following me. I don't care that I have another subscriber. I care that I'm entertaining another person because it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
So for me, it's become more about the emotion and the way I feel than what everybody else sees.
Yeah. Part of this video for me is to get a perspective of you that I have, but a lot of people may not have.
Oh.
And you've done a very good job of remaining true to yourself and humble throughout all of these things. I mean, you literally
you.
had the opportunity to interview Daniel Craig or be on something like a Good Morning show in the UK, and you're no different than you are personally. Is there what is the secret behind? And I think it kind of tails off what you just said, but how have you maintained this ability to not let any of this go to your head? Because personally, I know you well enough to know that it is that guy on YouTube and that guy talking to Daniel Craig and the guy sitting here with me are all the same person, a great person. But as far as that goes, I mean, how did you find a way to, was it like a conscious thing, or was it you're just kind of like, this is just something really cool that's happening and I'm going to soak it all in and just run with it?
I think a lot of it is I'm very self-aware that when many people who don't know me, like you know me, for example, see my channel or see me review a product or interview like a Daniel Craig, they probably think, oh, this guy has a big ego because of the circumstance and the situation I'm in, or the activity I'm doing, or the product, whatever it is. The thing that they don't realize is that I am just reacting to the person that I truly am, because that's the only thing I know how to do.
Right.
The only thing I know how to do is to film myself in my true reaction, because I cannot act well. I cannot. I can't read a script. It's why everything is improv. Like when they see me do a long soliloquy about Oliver Brown and I'm walking across the screen, I think a lot of people think that there's like cue cards or I've memorized something. I know something about Oliver Brown and I'm yakking about it.
Yeah.
Like you and I are waxing poetic here, and there's not a lot of ums and yahs, because I can string, my superpower is I can string together my thoughts in a very articulate way. It's my only superpower. So if I put that out there and I can demonstrate that this is how I really feel, you're getting my authentic self. I try to have my authentic self to be more concentrating on the person that I'm engaging with, even if it's a pretend audience, than myself. And I'll give you a great example. So Gatherall, take 225 people and try to make it engaging for each one of them. But one thing I did is, as I was talking to an individual, no matter who it was, I try not to break gaze, look over shoulders, look around. I didn't interrupt them. I didn't think about what I wanted to say. I drinked it in and I reacted to what they said. And I do that everywhere in my life. And I think it's a respect for others, as opposed to just trying to fly your own flag, which is quite frankly egotistical, and it's something that turns me off. So it's kind of how I try to live my life.
Gatherall is a perfect segue. What do you feel about, first off, what kind of created or inspired you? I actually found out yesterday that Danielle apparently created the name Gatherall. Is that
She
true?
did.
That's incredible.
Yeah, she did.
But as far as obviously what it's become and how it started, I mean, what was the idea behind the original, and how proud are you of where it's come?
I'm really proud. And I'll tell you why I'm really, really proud. But the way it gestated, it was just having people over my house that were friends. And we would have theme nights like a bunch of us goofballs do, Moonraker night and Casino Royale poker night. And I had all these things. And sometimes I captured on video or photos, and sometimes I didn't. It was just to gather people. We'd make theme food, or Danielle would make theme food. Those were so much fun. And I would leave, people would leave elated, I would be elated. And I'd be like, I wonder if I should share this with more people. This was all about sharing with more people, this feeling. This all gets down to the emotions that we create. So it got bigger. I did a local place a couple years in a row. You've been a part of them. For me, the thing that I got high on was meeting new people and starting new friendships and letting other people, the secret ingredient as I call it, meet and engage with other people. There's prizes, there's events, and we even had a celebrity this time. But when you come right down to it, what people always talk to me about is, I felt a connection. I made a new friend. I mustered up the courage. And that's what I'm most proud of. That people organically, without having to have a handbook or how to do this, they know that the power of the Bond community is the community. It's connecting with each other. It's not James Bond. Like, you know this, but people don't sit there and for 7 to 10 hours talk about James Bond. They get to know the humans behind the Bond community and the fans. Is there a little kicker of something we have all in common? But that just ignites the spark. And that's what I'm the most proud of, that people get it.
Yeah.
And it's still the same vision that I had when it was down in my basement.
Yeah. I did a little thing at Gatherall this year,
What'd you
which you
do?
were a part of. My kind of Bond's Apartment news report where I interviewed attendees. One attendee told me that they came alone. They thought that they might end up sitting alone in a corner.
Yeah.
And by the time they and I met, they were standing around 4 or 5 people that I figured they had known their whole lives. It's that obvious.
Yeah.
And then another gentleman told me that the thing that surprised him the most was learning so much about other people outside of Bond. So you were completely right. I mean, even me, who I've been to, I think now 4 of the 6 Gatheralls, which is crazy to
That is
think. I mean, it
crazy.
kind of seems
Yeah.
like the second one, which was my first, was forever ago.
Right.
But I mean, I do continue to see, you see the same people, you see new people every year, and it is weird. It's like Bond brings everybody there, but that's not the main focus.
Not at
The
all.
trivia is, the prizes are, the ambiance is, but you're really talking about like life in general. It's very strange. I mean, I think you've cultivated a very safe space for a lot of people.
I like the way you put that, safe space, because I know that people have a lot of intimidation, anxiety, trepidation. Even Rachel Grant, our Bond girl, she told me she was nervous.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way up to getting to the front door. And then, of course, she got into her own and had the time of her life, and now she wants to be a part of these moving forward.
Yeah.
Everybody has that same feeling. It gets back to a risk and reward and the reason for people being successful and not successful. Everything in life that you choose to do takes a certain amount of risk. That's worth it.
Yeah.
The things that really pay off take risk. Nothing that is important doesn't take risk. Coming to a room full of 225 strangers when you haven't done it before takes a risk, but the reward is so huge.
Yeah.
And it gets back to some of the Bond tropes. I mean, Bond risks his life. You know, he does these incredible things, but the rewards are so great, usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until the last
24 of the 25 times, yeah.
But
So, with the Gatherall, I want to ask you about what many people think of as your right-hand man, Mr. Joe Darlington.
oh, sure.
So Joe and you met, I believe you've told me you were speaking or he was speaking?
I was speaking of Hofstra.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then obviously that relationship somewhat worked out for the two of you guys, I think. Pretty decent.
Yeah. He's great.
Something incredible happened at the last Gatherall, which I think kind of shows just how far everything comes. But why was that so important to you to do, if you can share,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, what you did and how you did it and why you wanted to do it?
Yeah, it's funny too, because there's a tightrope with everything that you do, right? You skate on a razor's edge sometimes when you talk about emotion and connection and all this intrinsic stuff, and then you tie it to a physical piece. But in this particular case, there is a great brand called Analog, right?
Shift.
Analog Shift, and James Lambden's the CEO. He's a great friend of mine, huge Bond fan, great part of the Bond community. And we got to talking, and we talked about creating a moment during Gatherall where we thanked Joe for his selfless nature. Just absolute, like, and there's this whole thing of like, I get the fact that I'm kind of Mickey Mouse in Disney World. So I'm the mascot. But there is a Walt Disney who maybe isn't as on flags and on cups and made into cupcakes. You don't see Walt Disney as a cupcake and biting his head off.
Yeah.
But underneath the Mickey Mouse, behind the Mickey Mouse, you have this wonderful Walt Disney helping with this. So I get that I'm part Disney with the vision, but to execute some of these things, especially with Gatherall, the videos and the venue and things like that, you have Joe. But he's helped so many other people.
Yeah.
Without asking, can you put me as a cred? Don't forget to give me credit.
Yeah.
I need credit. And when am I going to be in it? Like Joe, it would never even cross his mind to think that way. There are so many things that happen in the Bond community, not just with my channel, that have Joe to thank or behind it or starting it as the OG. And we gave him an Omega watch.
Yeah.
And it was the whole idea of, sometimes watches are about promotions and celebratory moments.
Right.
So if we're celebrating Bond constantly, why wouldn't we celebrate the Bond community?
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better person to start that process than Joe Darlington.
Yeah.
And that's why we did
It
it.
was an amazing moment.
It's a cool moment.
And you've got to be able to step back and think of, look how far everything has come.
Yeah.
Not just the Bond experience or Joe being James Bond.
Right.
even just relationships with the brands obviously knowing you, knowing Joe, knowing what you both do, recognizing that and doing anything they can to be a part of it. It's got to be pretty special.
It's great. It's great. And I do truly believe as I don't know, snarky maybe even that I was saying it's in the beginning it's transactional for the brands. It has to be, right?
Yeah.
It's just their money, their product.
Yeah.
I think what happens is they become emotionally involved. The connection, the feeling, they get very into it. Analog Shift is a great example of that. To them, it's not about, oh, I hope that we get some publicity from this and people
Right.
start buying watches from us and things like that. They understand that you start with having an emotional connection to a brand
Yeah.
before you even talk about the products. And then you get loyalty. You get people coming back. And I think they really feel the drive
Yeah.
that we all have. But
Yeah.
no, it's a wonderful journey with them.
Yeah, I think to touch on Analog Shift for a second, the only thing that, I mean, one of many things, but the main thing that came from what happened with Joe and the Omega and that incredible moment, when it comes to Analog Shift, made me think, this is a place where I should spend my money because I actually feel like they care. Like they genuinely want me as a customer
Yeah.
and to develop a relationship and to talk watches.
Yeah.
You know, it's not actually a transaction. It's way
Right.
more than that.
Well, you said the magic word. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
You can have transactions. You can have somebody walk into a shop, buy something, and leave, but it's usually gum or milk.
Yeah.
It's gum or milk. So
Nothing in between.
in our cases, they build a long-standing heritage and relationship with somebody, lasts a lifetime.
Yeah. So I want to ask you to kind of finish this off.
Yeah.
What is next for
Oh.
David in the Bond experience?
Ooh.
Anything that you feel like you would like to have accomplished, that you're looking forward to? The floor is yours.
Doing more of this, doing more and creating more relationships.
Yeah.
That's it. I want to keep it very simple. There's no, I can't sit here and say, you know, I really want to go to this event, or I want to go to this premiere, or I want this watch, or anything like that. Like that doesn't really even cross my mind. What crosses my mind is maintaining this level of happiness and connection and engagement, and also every now and then improving myself in all of this. That's it. I want to keep it simple.
Well, hey, I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Thank you, man.
I
This
love
was
you,
fun.
buddy. You're the
Love
man.
You too.
Thank you guys for watching. If you like this, it's not happening again.
Oh.
15 years maybe. This is it.
This is it?
This is my last video. This is me
Oh.
at the time. No, just kidding. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
Thank you guys for watching. Catch you on the next one.